Well, I'm asking a lot of kind of like specific questions, but w- why don't you just tell us a bit about what the book is about?
Okay.
Whether literally in terms of the plot or what it means to you or whatever.
Sure. So Raised by Ghosts is a story that spans a little bit in the early 90s when I was in middle school or junior high, whichever you call it. And then mostly it's set in a vague high school time. In my head, it's sophomore year of high school, but it kind of things that happened vacillated, just sort of like the thick of high school. And the conceit of the book is that there'll be little vignettes, and then each vignette is accompanied by a note or a diary entry, or however you want to think of it, but a little written piece of paper. And the piece of paper, the written parts will either mimic or completely not mimic what's happening in the picture. So it'll give you more information of how to understand each of the vignettes, things that you might not be able to see. So a very simple moment can all of a sudden have like way bigger meaning because you just have been told that, oh, this is what's going on in her head. And so that's sort of the conceit of the book. So it goes through middle school and high school and just sort of the different areas of my life. And my family is always off screen, which is hard, done for a number of reasons, but also to give that feeling of being raised by ghosts. You never see them. Um, so so my mom or my dad or my sibling will often talk to me, but it's through a closed door, or sometimes you might see their shadow. So it's really just about, I think also a lot of teenagers are so solipsistic that they only experience their experience. They really have no idea what someone else is going through, even if they think they do, which I'm positive I did as well, even though I'm so nice.
Sure.
I'm sure I was blissfully unaware of some horrific thing happening to someone else. So that's sort of the reason of that. And then so it just goes throughout her life, and it deals with what home life is like, what school is for her or me, friendships. And then it
Do
sort of,
you explicitly see her as you, or is it like
no, it
the
is me. Yeah, yeah, yeah. I explicitly see it as it's, yeah, everything in the book is very the way I would approach the world. So it is me. Um, yeah. Yeah, nothing happened in the book that didn't happen to me. It just might have happened in slightly different orders, or
yeah,
slightly
right.
different people were there.
Hmm.
Um, yeah, and so you just go through the book, and then I have like a, crisis moment of feeling out of it, and that's when the book takes a turn to a
Right,
surreal state.
right. Um, the visual approach to this book is considerably different from Ephemera. Um, and I'm wondering how you kind of settled on your approaches to both books, because they're both beautiful and in some ways they almost look like they're drawn by two completely different
Mhm.
cartoonists.
So all the books I've ever done, they are all pretty much in different styles. I really like experimenting. I teach a lot of different mediums for my job. I teach watercolor and acrylic and drawing. I've taught photography. I've taught computer art. I teach ceramics. I really enjoy experimenting and trying different things. And so my books have always had different styles. When I started Ephemera, I really wanted the line work to be really clean and stylized and feel a little antiquated.
Mhm.
And I started drawing it on pen and paper, and then decided to start importing it into my iPad. And then I was like, oh, I could add color. Never done that before with a comic. Um, so I chose this blue and kind of rust color palette to go back and forth in the timeline for that one. And I wanted it to look like watercolor. So I worked pretty hard, like more painting on that one. And that's sort of how I developed the aesthetic for that. But I just really wanted that one to be, it's such a quiet story that I wanted to keep the colors really quiet. And initially it was all going to be in the blue tones because I wanted it to feel like a foggy memory.
Mhm.
But when I decided to sort of go back and forth in time, I thought I needed a visual change, but full color felt too schmaltzy, like too like
Yeah.
what's the Wizard of Oz, like all of a sudden everything's in color. It was just too much. So I
Yeah,
chose that
you retain that fogginess nonetheless. Like,
yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah.
I thought it
So
reminded me of when I first saw the book, like when you just sent it, I think you just sent it to Fantagraphics, and
yeah,
um the immediate connection I felt to it was like was classic animation.
yeah,
Whether early
yeah.
like
One of
Disney
the
and Fleischer Brothers or something
Yeah,
like
yeah, I love that stuff aesthetically. And then also I watch a lot of old movies. So I watch a lot of black and white movies. And have you ever seen Rebecca, that Hitchcock movie? It's based on Rebecca, the book by Daphne du Maurier. It's really good if you haven't, but
that.
she
Who stars in that?
that has oh my God, I'm blanking
Because I
right
feel like
now.
I've seen like 90% of Hitchcock's films, aside from maybe
Yeah,
very, very, very
I'm
early.
totally blanking on the actors' names
Huh.
right now. It's making me feel crazy. But it's
Eh,
set, in this large mansion, and the beginning of the book, you like go through the fog and you go through the gates and you go through the bushes. And that to me was like in my head when I was drawing Ephemera, was like I wanted to feel that feeling of like going back
yeah,
into a memory.
that makes perfect
Um,
sense. And then what about
um,
Raised by Ghosts?
with Raised by Ghosts, I think it's Laurence Olivier. Okay. With
Okay.
Raised by Ghosts, um, because it was, I knew I like the only thing I really knew was I was going to write about high school and I was going to write about notes. When I started, that's all I knew. And so um, I do everything, draw on my iPad for everything in Procreate, and I used just the pencil brushes. So I wanted to have that of what of a number basically that you would just like have to write with. Um, and so that I like started with that, and I was like, okay, well, I want it to feel sketchy. And then I just developed a color palette that had a fairly muted tones, because I
Earthy.
think I like that aesthetic anyways, and it gives that sort of feeling of memory for me. Um, but yeah, the sketchy style I felt would also let it feel almost like you had like picked it up and discovered it a little bit more than it was like set in stone. I liked the idea that it might just be some note that you found and had little
Yeah.
doodles in it.
I think visually we were talking about the difference, between some other YA and
Mhm.
um, in terms of maybe your writing, but I think visually it's also stands out in that way. It's got those kind of earthy, more naturalistic tones and a little less, for lack of a better way to put it, like a cutesy pop, bright
Yeah,
colors.
there's a lot of clean line work going on right now, I feel like in YA, which
Mhm.
looks great, but I feel like for this it would have not been the right style at all to have a
Mhm.
very clean brush aesthetic. So I wanted it to sort of be in with really detailed backgrounds was really important to get all those chicken fats.
Yeah, right. But like unlike Ephemera, which does have this kind of it's got this kind of antiquated look to it. It
Mhm.
does feel very contemporary, even though you're setting it in the 90s. Like it
Mhm.
feels like a contemporary work of art, that just happens to
Mm.
be a period piece, which is great. Um, Going back to where we should probably wrap this up pretty soon, but going back to where we first started, you were talking about reading comics
Mhm.
and you mentioned Charles Adams.
Mhm.
Didn't you tell me once that your family had some connection to Charles Adams?
Yeah, yeah, so my grandfather, my mom's dad, was his best friend. So my grandfather ran the Museum of the City of New York in the 50s. So he was in the art world and they were just best friends. So we have a couple Charles Adams in our family that he did for us. So the one that I have, they're huge. They're enormous. Like each of those little
Oh.
tiny New Yorker cartoons are huge. I mean, as far as
Mhm.
I know, like the ones we have are huge. Um, so in it, it's my grandparents' divorce and it's the Miller moving truck. That's my maiden name. And my grandmother is supposed to be like in this box that's being carried by two movers. And the neighbor sort of like, I think she would have at least helped you be moving. And it's got the house my mom grew up in Yonkers.
That's
So I have
incredible.
that, and that's in Ephemera. It's like in a little background panel in my mom's room.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah,
I don't
yeah. It's
remember that.
it's just lightly in there. And then yeah, I think I put it also in Raised by Ghosts. I think there's like a panel towards the end that has a little snippet of it, just to refer to that. We also haven't. My uncle has one that's so Charles Adams was Uncle Fester. That's like who he secretly
Mhm.
was. Um, and my grandfather was an archer. So we have this comic where my grandfather's dressed up as Robin Hood, splitting the arrow, but then Uncle Fester's behind him, splitting his arrow. So that's my little Charles Adams connection.
That's incredible.
Yeah, it's pretty
Did
fun.
you feel like a connection to his work as a kid?
Yeah.
I
I
mean,
mean,
thank you.
especially like it's so
Yeah.
dark, and I've always like
Yeah.
loved things that are a little funny and a little sad at the same time is like my favorite thing. So Charles Adams like was always like such a pleasure. And my kids love him now. We've read all like we have that big compilation book from the 90s, and
Yeah.
we've read every one of those like a million times, and it's very sweet and they love his work too.
I love that book. Yeah.
Yeah,
Well, you mentioned funny, sad, and I think that's like the perfect, simplest way to describe Raised by Ghosts. It's it's it is very funny. It is also very, like I said, affecting. It makes me very sad in parts. Um, and I think it's just really impressive that you could kind of use, this interior mind of a high schooler and middle schooler, and make me just really sort of feel those feelings again in a way that frankly gets harder and harder to the older I get.
mm-hmm.
Um, so I'm really a big fan, and I'm excited for other people to read it.
Thanks, Eric.
One thing I wanted to mention, we got some great blurbs for the book, one
Mhm.
of which is from Julia Wirtz,
Mhm.
who brings her kind of typically acerbic wit to the
Ugh,
blurb.
she's so
And
funny.
um, she says, if parental neglect leads to brilliant cartoonists like Briana, maybe we should all neglect our kids a little bit more, which of
Mhm.
course I know she doesn't mean. Um, but I thought it was a really brilliant insight into the work. And it does make me wonder, as someone who, reading it, has I have feelings and opinions about your parents as
Mhm.
parenting skills. I hope
Mhm.
that's not, too harsh to say, but um, but here you are, what a seemingly functional and healthy adult, parent of your own. Um, how did you how'd you
I
end
mean,
up
yeah,
sort of
they were, my mom was not a super functional adult for most of her life. But she did have a big heart. So my mom had, as much as she was real difficult and pretty horrific in some ways, but she also had a lot of passion and a lot of support and love in other ways. So I did get a lot of love along with a lot of unlove.
Mhm.
And my dad, I just could have been a roommate. I could have been a lady who lived two doors down from him, and he would have loved me just as much as he loved everybody. He was really interested in the things he was interested in. He's a very sweet man. Just really not particularly feeling the need to do anything big with parenting. Just was there dinner on the table? Great.
But did you always, I mean, it comes across in the book as well, like even as Brianna's figuring things out, you did seem to have this kind of mature for your age, ability to kind of see that, what you're talking about,
I
that like
think I got,
see the love in spite of maybe some
yeah,
evidence,
I
that
think that
would
was
make another kid react very differently.
right. I think that was my coping mechanism where I did very early on get the message, whether I read it somewhere or heard it, but it was like, these are just two people doing their best, even if their best is not that good. So that was like a mantra. I was like, they're just doing their best. They're just doing their best. And
Some
for a
people
long
go to
time,
therapy for 30 years to get to that point,
yeah.
as
Well,
adults.
yeah. So I, I feel like I got that early, but I think it made me also very like hyper self-reliant. So it's like no one's going to do this unless I'm going to do it, because you guys are out here, I don't know what they're doing. I got to make sure that I'm good, that I'm solid. So I have such a stable life. Like I've taught at the same school for almost 20 years, been with my husband for a long time, bought our house a long time ago. Everything in my life is very, very stable. And I think that that's because I had such a wild youth time, that like my home life was so in flux, that I've tried to build the opposite for myself. So it's crazy having kids because they just think this is normal. And it's like, this is a lot of work. They have no idea.
Well, your kids are lucky for it, and so are we.
Thanks.
Because because we've got two great books now, and hopefully more.
Yeah, let's do it.
Well, we probably should wrap this up. Is there anything you wanted to mention or
No, I just want to say
plug or
it's so great working with Fantagraphics. I love you guys so much. I feel like I
thanks?
felt really supported as an artist, and I feel like the Fantagraphics ethos, when I describe working with you guys to other people, is just that I feel like Fantagraphics believes in their artists and trusts them to make the work, and that feels amazing. And I've gotten so much support from you guys, and I just really appreciate it. And thank you.
Well, the trust is well warranted because I mean, when you first described this book to me, um, it was it was pretty unformed. I
Yeah.
mean,
It's like, hey, Eric, I want to do this book.
and the kind of thing where I think that in the wrong hands, this kind of hybrid of text and images
Yeah.
can be a little could go sideways a little bit, but
Yeah.
you handle it perfectly, even how you described earlier about how the text only informs you so much and the images um, illuminate the things you read in the notes, and
Right.
there's a real flow to it that's really really nice.
Thanks. Yeah, they
um,
need each other. The text and the images, you can't just
mhm.
have one or the other. Yeah.
But there's no like rhythmic disruption
Mm.
by this kind of staccato effect that
Hmm.
it could be.
Yeah.
If
Yeah. I was worried about that in the beginning,
I
but I
think
feel
we
like,
may have
I feel like
even
it solved it pretty
yeah,
nicely.
I think we may have even briefly kind of talked about it early on.
Hmm.
You navigated it perfectly, I thought. So yeah, thank you very much for doing the book and for this conversation. It's always good to talk to you.
Same. Back at ya.
Cool. Thanks, Brianna.
All right. Thanks, Eric.